The mountains did not care who you were. They did not care about uniforms, flags, or the reason you were there. They did not care about orders, medals, or the names written in sealed folders. At 13,000 feet, the cold erased everything equally. Ava Calder lay prone against a ridge of ice and black stone, her body pressed flat into the mountain as if she were trying to disappear into it. The wind slid over her ghillie suit in long, patient breaths, carrying needles of snow that found every exposed seam. The temperature had dropped again, somewhere below -20, but Ava had stopped counting hours ago. Her breathing was slow, controlled, almost absent. Beside her, slightly downhill and 5 meters to the left, Mark Reyes adjusted his spotting scope with fingers that no longer felt like his own. He did not curse. He never did. He simply exhaled once, sharply, and settled back into stillness. Thermal sweep in 60. He murmured into the throat mic, voice barely louder than the wind. Ava did not answer. She didn't need to. Below them, carved into a narrow valley between two frozen peaks, lights glowed where no lights should have existed. A compound, temporary, mobile, and deliberately off-grid, had been assembled in less than 72 hours. Prefab structures, satellite uplinks disguised as weather equipment, armed perimeter patrols rotating in uneven intervals to avoid pattern recognition, cartel infrastructure, but not the kind that moved drugs or weapons. This was something else. Ava shifted her eye behind the optic, the world narrowing into clean lines and distant movement. The compound sat like a scar against the snow, generators humming under layers of insulation. Heat signatures bloomed and faded as men moved between buildings. She counted them automatically. 14 visible, possibly more underground. At the center stood a reinforced structure, longer, lower, more heavily shielded. No windows. Multiple redundant power lines. Command. That's them, Mark said quietly. All the names our analysts couldn't place in one room. Ava tracked a guard as he paused, stamping his feet against the cold. She felt nothing toward him. No anger. No satisfaction. Just distance. What about the meat window? She asked. Mark glanced at his tablet. The screen dimmed to the lowest usable setting. 35 minutes. Once they start, we'll have maybe 10 before they scatter. 10 minutes. 10 minutes to stop something that had taken years to assemble. Ava thought of the briefing, not the sanitized slides, but the off-record part, when the room had gone quiet and the projector had been turned off. A virus. Engineered, resilient. Embedded into legitimate commercial goods, food-grade materials, medical supplies, distribution chains that no one would question. Not lethal at first, just destabilizing. Enough to overwhelm systems. Enough to make advanced countries turn inward. The cartel wasn't selling death. They were selling collapse. Rules stay the same, Mark said. No second chances. No missed confirmations. Ava's finger rested alongside the trigger guard. Not touching. Not yet. I know, she replied. The wind shifted. For a moment, the compound lights flickered. Mark stiffened. You see that? He asked. Yeah. The flicker happened again, shorter this time. A microsecond drop in illumination, barely noticeable. Backup generators shouldn't do that, Mark said. Ava's gaze slid across the perimeter. 2 guards had stopped walking. One lifted his head, scanning the ridge line with sudden alertness. They're running a sweep, she said. Passive sensors, maybe seismic. Mark's jaw tightened. Then our clock just moved. Before Ava could respond, the first shot cracked through the air. It wasn't theirs. The sound came from below, sharp, high caliber, and much closer than it should have been. Ava's scope snapped left as a burst of light flared near the outer fence. One of the guards dropped without a sound. What the hell? Mark began. The second shot followed instantly, punching into the rock less than a meter from Mark's position. Ava rolled, dragging her rifle with her as snow exploded where she'd been lying seconds before. Contact, Mark shouted, already moving. The mountain answered with echoes. Ava flattened behind a slab of ice as another round tore through the space above her head. Whoever was shooting knew exactly where they were. High ground, opposite ridge, she said, forcing her voice steady. They were waiting. Mark cursed once, low and furious. We've been compromised. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Ava popped up just long enough to scan the far ridge. She caught the briefest glint of glass before she dropped again. Sniper team, she said. At least one. At least two, Mark corrected. The next impact hit him before Ava could finish turning. She heard the sound first, a dull, wet crack that didn't belong to stone or ice. Mark's body jerked, his rifle slipping from numb fingers as he collapsed sideways into the snow. Mark, Ava reached him in two movements, sliding on her knees, already knowing. Blood bloomed dark against the white, too fast, too much. The round had taken him high in the chest, just under the collarbone. His breath rattled once, then stuttered. Ava, he tried. She pressed her hand down instinctively. Useless pressure against something no field kit could fix. I'm here, she said. Stay with me. His eyes flicked toward the compound below, lights still glowing, still ignorant. Don't, he swallowed, breath shallow. Don't let this go. Another shot cracked overhead, sending shards of ice raining down. Ava dragged Mark behind the ridge, her heart hammering, the cold suddenly irrelevant. She checked his wound again, already cataloging the damage. Pulmonary collapse. Massive hemorrhage. Unsurvivable. Mark's hand found her sleeve, fingers weak but insistent. Promise me, he said. Ava met his eyes. I promise. He exhaled once, and did not inhale again. For several seconds, Ava stayed exactly where she was, her hand still pressed against Mark's chest, her breath fogging the air between them. The wind howled over the ridge, indifferent. She closed his eyes. Then she lifted her rifle. The mountain had taken her partner. It would not take the mission. Ava didn't let herself grieve. Not yet. Grief was heavy. Grief slowed hands. Grief made you look backward when the only thing keeping you alive was forward motion. She forced her mind into the same narrow channel it always used in a crisis. Observe, decide, act. Mark Reyes lay still beside her, his face already paling against the snow. The mountain wind tugged at his sleeve like it was impatient. Ava's fingers tightened around her rifle until her glove creaked. Another round snapped overhead and slapped the ridge behind them with a hard, stinging crack. The shooter wasn't guessing. They were measuring. Ava shifted deeper behind the ice slab, making herself smaller, lowering her profile to almost nothing. She used the rock like a second skin. Okay, she whispered to herself, not a prayer, an anchor. Okay. She checked her gear by feel. Rifle secure. 2 spare mags. 1 sidearm. A compact radio that was now little more than a dead weight. A thermal patch kit. A flare. Useless unless extraction was possible. A thin emergency blanket that crinkled like betrayal if you moved too fast. Mark's spotting scope lay half buried in snow where he dropped it. Ava's eyes flicked to it, then away. Not yet. First, survive the ridge. Second, finish the mission. Below, the cartel compound hummed with life, still unaware that 2 shadows above them had been turned into one. The lights stayed steady now. Whatever sensor sweep had spooked them had ended or shifted, which meant the ambush team up high had likely been the real trap. Someone had drawn her and Mark out here deliberately. Someone who knew the mission mattered. Ava's breath slowed again, controlled and quiet. She slid her cheek against the stock and peeked over the ridge by a fraction of an inch, just enough to search. The opposite ridge was a jagged line of rock and snowdrift, a darker seam against the night blue sky. The wind-up there was brutal too. Any shooter would have to be stable, sheltered, disciplined. Ava didn't search for a body. She searched for a mistake. A glint. A heat bloom. Snow disturbed in a pattern that didn't belong to wind. Nothing. Then, barely, a shadow shifted behind a boulder, too deliberate to be weather. Ava froze. She waited. The shadow moved again. A slow lean. A careful angle. A shooter. But not just any shooter. Someone trained enough to anticipate her anticipation. Someone who would be watching the exact place she was watching. Ava pulled back, heart steady, mind sharp. They want me pinned here. If she stayed, they would bleed her dry with time and cold. If she moved too quickly, they'd tag her in the open. She needed to make them believe she was still behind this ridge while she slipped somewhere else. Ava crawled backward, inch by inch, dragging the rifle with her, keeping the muzzle from scraping rock. Every sound was a risk. Every breath could be visible. She reached Mark's body. Her throat tightened for half a heartbeat. Not grief, focus with teeth. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and she meant it, but it wasn't the kind of apology that ended in surrender. She gently pulled the spotting scope free, wiped snow from its lens, and set it beside her rifle. She also took Mark's range card, the small waterproof strip of numbers he'd kept tucked into his sleeve. Not because she couldn't range on her own, because it was his, because it kept him in the mission. Ava slid the scope forward until only the glass edge peeked above the ridge line. She angled it toward the opposite ridge, making it look like a human eye. Then she didn't look through it. She watched from the side. 3 seconds passed. 5. 7. A flash of movement. Fast, sharp, on the opposite ridge. A shooter had fired. The round hit the scope, shattering glass in a spray of glittering shards. Ava flinched at the sound, but her face stayed flat. Got you. They had shot at the eye, which meant they had been waiting for her to peek. Now she knew their patience had limits. Ava didn't shoot back yet. She didn't give them the satisfaction. She crawled left, keeping low, using the ridge's natural fracture line. The snow here was thinner, the rock more exposed, better for stability, worse for warmth. She moved anyway. Her new position gave a different angle on the opposite ridge, enough to see a narrow gap between boulders. If the shooter was smart, they'd relocate after firing. If they were arrogant, they'd stay. Ava hoped for arrogance. She settled in, pressed her cheek into the stock, and stared into the gap. The wind tore at her hood. Snow drifted across her scope like smoke. Then the face appeared. Not fully, just an eye, a sliver of cheek, the edge of a balaclava. Ava's crosshair didn't jump. It slid. Center mass. She exhaled. The rifle bucked once, clean and controlled. The face vanished. Ava rolled immediately, not waiting for confirmation. Return fire came a breath later, ripping into the rock where she'd been. Stone chipped, snow exploded, and the ridge screamed with echoes. So there were at least 2 shooters. The first was down, or wounded. The second was now angry. Ava forced herself to breathe. She had done what she needed. She'd reduced the pressure. But she hadn't escaped the trap. The second shooter would keep her pinned, and the cartel below would soon notice something was wrong. Time was still the enemy. Ava checked her watch again. 1:29. The meet window would happen soon. The cartel leadership wasn't coming here to admire mountains. They were coming because they believed this place was safe. Ava's jaw tightened. If I fail, it isn't just a mission lost. It's millions of lives that never know they were almost stolen. She slid back to Mark's body, careful now. She needed something else, something to change the board again. Mark had carried a compact thermal device, a small unit used to confirm heat signatures through bad visibility. Ava pulled it from his pack and stared at it for a second like it was a foreign object. Her hands shook slightly. Not fear. Cold. And the beginning of fatigue. She powered the thermal on. The world shifted into a palette of ghosts, cold blues and blacks, with heat blooming bright. The compound below glowed like a wound in the landscape. Human shapes moved within it, bright points drifting between structures. On the opposite ridge, Ava's breath caught. A bright heat signature crouched behind a boulder, weapon braced. Another, farther back, lower. And a third shape, small, faint, moving uphill. Not a shooter. A spotter? Or someone repositioning to flank. Ava's mind snapped into clarity. They weren't trying to kill her fast anymore. They were trying to contain her. Containment meant they cared about the compound's meeting, which meant the mission mattered enough that someone had hired real professionals to protect it. Cartels bought many things, but discipline like this usually came from somewhere else. Ava swallowed hard and forced herself not to follow that thought too far. Conspiracies were seductive. Conspiracies were also distractions. Right now, the enemy was real and immediate. She used the thermal to map their positions, memorizing angles. Then she did something she hated. She exposed herself. Not fully, just enough to draw a shot. A controlled risk. A round snapped into rock near her shoulder, too close. Ava dropped, heart pounding. Good. He's focused on me. She shifted left, low, and angled the thermal again. The third shape, the flanker, had moved closer. If that person reached her ridge, the fight would become close quarters in snow and rock. Ava couldn't allow close quarters. She was alone. Alone meant every exchange had to be asymmetric. She crawled to a small depression and pulled out a single device from her kit, a compact charge designed for emergencies, not demolition. She wasn't going to use it to create chaos. She was going to use it to create sound. Ava set it against a rock on the far left side of the ridge, away from her position, and armed it with a short delay. Then she crawled back, fast but low, until her lungs burned. The detonation was not big, but in the mountains, not big still sounded like the world cracking. Snow lifted in a white bloom. Rock dust puffed into the wind. And, most importantly, every heat signature on the opposite ridge reacted. They flinched. They shifted. They turned toward the sound. Ava used the moment to move. She didn't run. Running in snow got you killed. She slid down the backside of the ridge into a shallow cut where the wind was calmer. The cold in the cut was sharper, but it hid her silhouette. She moved downhill, away from her original position, toward a secondary overwatch point she and Mark had identified in the daylight, a narrow ledge that looked down into the compound at a steeper angle. It was a worse position for fighting other snipers. It was a better position for the mission. Ava reached the ledge and pressed herself flat, chest heaving. Her ribs ached from the sudden movement. Her forearms felt like stone. She forced her breathing under control. Then she raised her rifle. The compound looked closer now. The main structure sat centered like a command heart. A few figures had gathered near the entry, heat signatures bright and tight, moving with purpose. The meeting was starting. Ava's mind shifted gears again. There were two missions now. Survive the snipers on the ridge. Stop the leadership meeting below. She couldn't do both forever. But she didn't need forever. She needed minutes. Ava adjusted her optic, scanning for the true targets. Not guards, not runners. The people inside the reinforced structure would be the ones deciding. She couldn't hear what they were saying from here. But she didn't need to. She'd been briefed on the stakes, a plan to push contaminated goods into legitimate distribution. Something designed to slip through safeguards because it looked normal. That kind of plan didn't require an army. It required leadership. Ava steadied the scope on the entry point. A guard opened the heavy door. Two figures emerged, one broad, one slim, both surrounded by protection. They moved like men who believed themselves untouchable. Ava's finger rested near the trigger again. This was the moment where most people imagined emotion, anger, vengeance, justice. Ava felt none of that. She felt a cold, clean certainty. Mark's death is not allowed to mean nothing. Below, one of the leaders paused, turning slightly as if to speak to someone behind him. A small gesture, casual, bored. Ava's crosshair centered on the pause. She inhaled, held, then exhaled halfway, just enough. Her finger tightened. The shot cracked. The leader dropped out of frame, pulled backward as if the mountain had yanked him by a string. Shouts erupted below. Guards scrambled. Lights swung wildly across snow, searching for an attacker in a world that offered too many shadows. Ava didn't celebrate. She didn't even watch the body. She shifted her aim to the second leader, the slim figure, now moving fast toward cover. The guards attempted to shield him, their bodies forming a protective wall. Ava had one chance. Maybe two. She adjusted for the movement and wind. And that's when the ridge above her answered. A round snapped into the rock near her face, showering her with stone chips. The enemy sniper had found her new position. Ava's eyes narrowed. So it would be like this. A duel in the mountains, with the fate of millions hanging from a few breaths and a few pounds of pressure on a trigger. She lowered her profile, shifted her rifle, and whispered a sentence that felt like a vow carved into ice. No mistakes. Then she raised the scope again, because the second shot, the one that mattered most, was still waiting. The compound exploded into motion. Alarms didn't blare, not the kind meant to summon help. These were internal signals, sharp and contained, meant to move people who already knew where to go. Floodlights snapped on, washing the snow in harsh white. Guards fanned outward, weapons up, boots crunching in frantic patterns that betrayed training without calm. Ava lay still on the ledge, the cold biting through layers until it felt like her bones had been packed in ice. She kept her cheek welded to the stock, her eyes steady behind the optic, letting the chaos below settle into something readable. Panic always made patterns louder. The first leader she dropped was gone, dragged inside, maybe, or already left where he fell. It didn't matter. The effect mattered. Shouting, pointing, orders colliding with each other. A convoy of vehicles revved to life on the far side of the compound, engines struggling in the thin air. The second leader, slimmer, faster, had vanished behind cover. Ava tracked movement along the reinforced structure's outer wall. Guards clustered there, too many for comfort. She needed a clean angle, a narrow window. Above her, the mountain shifted. Not snow, not wind, a presence. She felt it before she saw it. The pressure of attention, the sense of being measured by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The enemy sniper was close enough now that Ava could almost hear his breathing between shots. One of you, she thought, not as a curse but a fact. She slid her gaze upward without lifting her head, scanning the ridgeline through the edge of her optic. A rock outcropping caught her eye, too symmetrical, too clean against the surrounding chaos. A heat shimmer flickered there, faint and intermittent. The sniper was good. He was also patient. Ava didn't rush. Rushing was how people died in mountains like these. She adjusted her bipod by a centimeter, shifting her weight so the ledge carried more of her load. Her pulse slowed, each beat falling into a familiar cadence. She thought of Mark, not his death, not the blood, but his voice during training, calm and irritatingly precise. You don't fight the shot. You invite it. Below, a figure broke from cover and sprinted toward the convoy. The slim leader. Guards flanked him, bodies tight, heads low. Ava's world narrowed. Wind from the north. Slight cross-current from the valley. Distance well within her comfort zone. But the angle was steep, the target moving, and time was collapsing. She inhaled, then paused. The ridge above her cracked. The enemy sniper fired. The round punched into the ledge inches from Ava's forearm, splintering rock and tearing fabric. Pain flared sharp and hot, then receded into something distant. She rolled, fast and practiced, letting the mountain swallow her silhouette. Another shot followed, closer. The sniper was walking his fire, correcting with each breath. Ava pressed herself flat, heart pounding now, the edges of her vision tightening. Blood seeped through her sleeve, not deep, but enough to matter in the cold. She had seconds. Finish the mission. Ava forced herself back onto the ledge, ignoring the burn in her arm, ignoring the scream of her body to stay down. She reacquired the compound in one smooth motion. The slim leader had reached the lead vehicle. The door swung open. This was it. Ava didn't wait for perfection. She trusted preparation. Her finger tightened. The shot cracked through the air, clean and final. Below, the slim figure collapsed against the vehicle, sliding down the metal door as guards shouted and scrambled. The convoy stalled, engines revving uselessly. Ava exhaled. 2 shots. 2 decisions. Millions of lives balanced on fractions of seconds. But the mountain wasn't done with her. The sniper above her fired again, fury now bleeding into his precision. The round tore through Ava's pack, shredding fabric and punching into the ledge behind her head. Stone chips peppered her face. She was out of time on this perch. Ava rolled backward off the ledge and let gravity take her. She slid down the slope on her side, digging her boots into the snow to control the descent. Pain flared in her arm with every jolt, but she rode it, teeth clenched, rifle held tight to her chest. She came to rest in a shallow ravine where the wind screamed overhead but couldn't quite reach her. For a moment, she lay there, gasping, the world tilting. Then she moved. Ava checked her arm, through the sleeve, fingers probing quickly. The wound was shallow, a grazing hit. Bleeding, but manageable. She tore open a thermal patch with her teeth and slapped it into place, sealing heat and pressure in one practiced motion. She was slower now, but still alive. The radio crackled. Not her unit. Not extraction. An open channel. Compound breached. Leadership down. Initiate containment. Ava's stomach tightened. Containment. That meant evidence. Files. Devices. Samples. The cartel wouldn't abandon the plan just because the meeting had failed. Plans like this had redundancy. Layers. If the leadership fell, the operation would scatter and adapt, unless something stopped it entirely. Ava forced herself up and moved through the ravine, keeping low, using the terrain like a shield. She angled toward the compound, not to engage guards, not to play hero. To confirm, she crept to a vantage point that overlooked a secondary structure, smaller and less guarded. A logistics building. Heat signatures clustered inside, frantic and uneven. Ava powered on the thermal again. Inside the building, she saw crates being opened, contents checked, repacked. Men shouting, pointing at screens. A device, a compact unit, shielded, with markings she didn't recognize but understood enough. Distribution control. If it left this mountain, the damage would be done somewhere far away, invisible and unstoppable. Ava's jaw tightened. I can't hit everything. But she didn't need to. She needed to break the chain. She scanned for the highest-ranking heat signature in the room. Someone who moved less, who others deferred to. She found him near the back, standing still while chaos spun around him. Ava adjusted her rifle for the new angle, breathing through the ache in her arm. She waited for the door to open. It did. The leader stepped into the cold air, barking orders into a radio, his breath steaming in the night. Ava didn't hesitate. The shot dropped him mid-sentence. Inside the building, panic spiked. Heat signatures scattered. Crates were abandoned. Someone dropped to their knees. Ava stayed still, watching the confusion ripple outward. Then she moved. She slipped away from the vantage point, back into the ravine, then deeper into the mountain's folds. The enemy sniper fired twice more, blindly now, rounds cracking into snow and rock while behind her. He'd lost her. Ava didn't feel triumph. She felt exhaustion. The cold pressed in, heavier now. Her limbs moved slower. Every step demanded negotiation. She followed the exfil route she and Mark had memorized, a path that avoided obvious lines, that used the mountain's natural cruelty as cover. The climb was brutal. Her lungs burned. Her vision blurred at the edges. Halfway up, she stopped. Not because she was tired, because she was being watched again. Ava turned slowly, scanning the ridge behind her. Nothing. Then, a shape detached from the darkness. The enemy sniper, closer now, rifle raised, his silhouette stark against the snow. They stared at each other across 20 meters of frozen air. No shots, just breath. Ava saw his eyes then, focused, calculating, not hateful. Another professional. Another ghost. For a moment, she thought he might speak. He didn't. He fired. Ava fired at the same time. The mountain swallowed the sound. When the echo faded, only one shape remained standing. Ava lowered her rifle, chest heaving, her vision tunneling. She stood there longer than she should have, just to be sure. Then she turned away. The descent on the far side of the mountain was slower, lonelier. Dawn crept into the sky, pale and unforgiving, revealing the scars of the night. Smoke rose faintly from the compound below, already distant. Hours later, when her legs threatened to fold and the cold began to feel warm, a dangerous sign, Ava triggered her emergency beacon. She collapsed into the snow and stared at the sky, too tired to think. The extraction team found her there, half buried, rifle still in hand. When they asked her how many shots she'd fired, she didn't answer right away. She thought of Mark, of the ridge, of the leaders who would never finish their plan, of the crates that would never leave the mountain. Enough, she said finally. Ava woke to white, not snow, fabric. The ceiling above her was smooth, unblemished, lit by recessed panels that hummed softly. The air smelled sterile, filtered, scrubbed of anything that might remind a person where they had been before. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the pain returned. It arrived in layers. The deep ache in her arm, the tightness in her chest, the dull throb behind her eyes that spoke of altitude, dehydration, and adrenaline finally burning itself out. Ava exhaled slowly, testing her body like equipment after a drop. She was alive. That realization carried no triumph. A monitor beeped somewhere to her right. Tubes tugged faintly at her arm. She turned her head and saw the edge of a curtain, beige and heavy, drawn halfway around the bed. Medical bay, not a civilian one. She recognized the soundscape immediately, the controlled quiet, the lack of chatter, the sense that every noise was intentional. She had woken up in places like this before, after operations that weren't meant to exist. Ava flexed her fingers. They worked. Good. The curtain shifted. A man stepped through, clipboard in hand, his uniform crisp in a way that suggested he hadn't been anywhere near a mountain in the last 48 hours. He looked at her like a problem already halfway solved. "You're awake," he said. Ava didn't answer. He glanced at the monitor, then back at her. "You've been under for 18 hours. You lost some blood. Mild hypothermia. No permanent damage." She watched his mouth move, filing away details. Rank insignia. The way he stood, just slightly angled, as if expecting someone else to enter at any moment. "Do you know where you are?" he asked. "Yes," Ava said. He paused. "Where?" "A room where I'm not supposed to talk freely." That earned her the faintest smile. Not warmth. "Assessment. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Harris," he said. "I'll be overseeing your debrief." Ava stared at the ceiling. That wasn't fast. "No," Harris agreed. "It wasn't." Silence stretched. Finally, Ava spoke. "Did it work?" Harris's eyes flicked to the curtain, then back. The immediate threat was neutralized. "That's not what I asked." He hesitated. "Yes," he said. "The distribution chain was disrupted. Permanently." Ava closed her eyes. Only for a second. Mark. The ridge. The cold. It hadn't been for nothing. Harris cleared his throat. "There are complexities." Ava's jaw tightened. There always are. The debrief room was smaller than she expected. No flags. No windows. Just a metal table, 2 chairs, and a wall-mounted screen that stayed dark. Ava sat with her arm bandaged, her clothes replaced by plain fatigues with no markings. Harris sat across from her. 2 other men leaned against the far wall, silent, observing. "Let's start simple," Harris said. "Walk me through the operation." Ava did. She spoke evenly, without embellishment. She described insertion, overwatch, the compromised position, Mark's death. She listed the shots she'd taken, the decisions she'd made, the moments where she'd deviated from protocol. Harris listened without interruption. When she finished, he nodded once. "You understand the gravity of what you were involved in?" "Yes." "You understand that much of this remains classified?" "Yes." "You understand that discussing it outside approved channels would constitute a violation of?" Ava leaned forward. "Don't." The word cut through the room. Harris's expression tightened. "Excuse me. I know the language," Ava said quietly. I know the threats. I also know what we stopped. One of the men at the wall shifted. Harris folded his hands. What you stopped will never be discussed publicly. Ava stared at him. Millions of lives. We'll never know how close they came, Harris finished. That's how prevention works. Ava felt something cold settle in her chest. And Mark? She asked. Harris's eyes flicked down to his notes. Staff Sergeant Reyes died in action. Ava waited. He will receive posthumous recognition, Harris added. Privately. Privately. No names. No explanation. No accountability. Ava laughed once, sharp and humorless. You'll put him in a file, she said. You'll bury what happened, and in a few years someone else will stand on another mountain wondering why they're alone. Harris didn't deny it. That's not your concern anymore, he said. You're being reassigned. Ava's head snapped up. Reassigned. Medically retired, Harris corrected. Effective immediately. The words hit harder than any round. Ava sat back slowly. You're sidelining me. We're protecting you. Ava's voice dropped. From what? Harris met her gaze. From asking the wrong questions. Silence filled the room again. Then Harris slid a document across the table. Non-disclosure. Lifetime. Ava didn't touch it. You expect me to sign this, she said. I expect you to understand reality, Harris replied. What happened in those mountains will not become a story. It will not become a lesson. It will become a line item marked resolved. Ava thought of the crates. The device. The leader barking orders into the cold air. You're wrong, she said. Harris tilted his head. About what? Stories always leak, Ava said. You can slow them. You can bury them. But they surface. Harris smiled thinly. Only if someone digs. Ava's gaze didn't waver. Then you'd better hope no one does. They released her 2 days later. No ceremony. No handshake. Just a ride to an airfield and a signature confirming she was now a civilian. Her gear was gone. Her rifle was gone. Mark's things were gone. All she had left was the memory and the weight of knowing how close the world had come to breaking. Ava stood on the tarmac as the transport lifted off, the wind whipping her hair, and felt something inside her crack. Not grief. Disillusionment. She went home to an apartment that felt too small, too quiet. She slept badly. She woke at odd hours, her body expecting alarms that never came. News reports mentioned nothing. No leaks. No investigations. The cartel story that surfaced weeks later was vague. Internal violence, leadership collapse. Nothing that suggested how close the world had come to catastrophe. Ava watched the screen and felt her hands curl into fists. This was the second war. The one fought in silence. Months passed. Then one night, her secure phone vibrated. A single message. Unknown sender. You're not the only one who remembers. Ava stared at the screen, heart pounding. Another message followed. They buried it too deep. They always do. But they left fingerprints. Ava typed slowly. Who is this? The reply came almost instantly. Someone who lost people. Someone who doesn't want the next mountain to be higher. Ava's breath caught. A final message appeared. If the truth ever comes out, will you stand by it? Ava looked around her apartment. The blank walls, the quiet, the carefully constructed normalcy. She thought of Mark. She thought of the shots. She thought of the silence that followed. Her fingers moved. Yes. The typing indicator blinked, then vanished. Outside, the city hummed, unaware. Ava stood by the window, watching the lights, and understood something with chilling clarity. The mission hadn't ended in the mountains. It had only changed terrain. The file was small. That was the first thing Ava noticed. Not a massive archive. Not a dramatic data dump. Just a compressed packet, carefully labeled, clean in a way that suggested it had been assembled by someone who understood both evidence and restraint. She didn't open it immediately. She sat at her kitchen table with the lights off, the city outside her window glowing in soft fragments. The phone lay in front of her, silent now. Whoever had contacted her knew better than to linger. Ava poured herself a glass of water and drank it slowly, grounding herself in the ordinary weight of it. This was how you prepared for something irreversible, by touching things that reminded you what normal felt like. Then she opened the file. Inside were fragments of a story she already knew too well. After-action summaries that didn't match internal timestamps. Logistics logs that showed containers flagged, then unflagged, without explanation. Secure communications referencing the mountain operation with language that minimized, reframed, redirected. And then the names. Not the cartels. The others. Contractors. Intermediaries. Officials whose signatures appeared just often enough to be coincidence if you wanted them to be. Ava leaned back in her chair, heart heavy. This wasn't a smoking gun. It was something better. A pattern. Her phone vibrated again. Unknown sender. This won't work if it comes from me. Ava typed back. Then why send it? A pause. Because you were there. Ava closed her eyes. She had known this moment was coming. The quiet months after the mountain had never been peace. They had been pressure building behind a dam. She typed, "What do you want from me?" The reply came slower this time. Context. Not rage. Not heroics. Just the truth, placed where it can't be ignored. Ava stared at the screen. Placed. That meant press. Oversight. Independent review. The places where stories didn't explode, they spread. She thought of Harris. Of the debrief room. Of the document slid across the table. Lifetime silence. Ava stood and walked to the window. The city below was alive. People going home. People meeting for drinks. People planning futures that assumed stability as a given. They would never know how close that stability had come to fracturing. Unless someone told them. Ava turned back to the table and opened a new document. She didn't start with the shots. She didn't start with Mark's death. She started with the cold. With the altitude. With the silence. With the reason two people had been sent to a place where survival itself was never guaranteed. She wrote carefully, deliberately, like someone assembling a rifle, piece by piece, no wasted movement. She described the mission without dramatics. She described the threat without technical detail. She described the outcome without naming herself as anything more than what she was. A witness. When she finished, the sun was coming up. She read it once. Then again. It didn't accuse. It didn't demand. It simply laid events side by side and let the space between them speak. Ava encrypted the document and sent it to 3 places. An investigative journalist known for patience, not spectacle. A congressional oversight office with a history of quiet persistence. And a veterans advocacy group that understood how often silence was mistaken for loyalty. Then she waited. The response didn't come as a storm. It came as ripples. A request for clarification. A follow-up question. A polite acknowledgement. Days passed. Then weeks. Ava went back to work, ordinary work. She bought groceries. She ran in the mornings, her arms still aching faintly when the weather shifted. She dreamed less of the mountain now, though the cold never fully left her. Then one afternoon, her phone buzzed with a notification from a news outlet she didn't follow. She opened it. The headline was careful, measured. Senate panel reviews classified operation following inconsistencies in logistics oversight. No names. No accusations. Yet, Ava exhaled slowly. That night, the unknown sender messaged again. It's moving. Ava typed back. Slow is fine. They're asking questions. Good. Another pause. They'll look for you. Ava stared at the message. She thought of the mountain again. Not the shots, not the death, but the moment after, when she'd stood alone and realized the mission wasn't finished just because the shooting had stopped. She typed. They already did once. The hearing wasn't public. It wasn't meant to be. But the questions leaked. Why had oversight been bypassed? Why were certain approvals retroactive? Why did casualty timelines not align with command decisions? Ava wasn't summoned at first. That came later, quietly, through a lawyer who didn't smile. You understand the risk, he said. Ava nodded. I understood it the moment I said yes. The room she testified in was different from the debrief room. There were more people, more eyes, more uncertainty. No one threatened her. They didn't need to. They asked her to describe the operation. She did. They asked her why she believed the threat was real. She answered without embellishment. They asked her if she had proof beyond her account. Ava slid the file across the table. Silence followed. This time, it wasn't dismissal. It was calculation. Weeks later, a report was released, heavily redacted, carefully worded, but unmistakable. Failures in oversight. Breakdowns in accountability. Recommendations for reform. No medals were stripped. No dramatic arrests made headlines. But 2 officials resigned. One quietly disappeared from advisory roles. A new review framework was announced. It wasn't justice in the way people imagined justice. It was something more realistic. A correction. Ava stood on her balcony the night she read the final summary, the city lights flickering below. She felt no triumph, no relief, only a quiet sense that something dangerous had been slowed. Her phone buzzed one last time. Unknown sender. They won't thank you. Ava typed back. I didn't do it for thanks. Do you regret it? Ava thought of Mark, of the Ridge, of the leaders who never finished their plan. She thought of the millions of lives that went on uninterrupted, unaware of the narrow margin that had protected them. She typed, no. The typing indicator appeared, then disappeared. Ava put the phone down and looked out over the city. The world would never know her name. And that was fine. Some shots echoed. Others simply changed direction. Ava Calder turned off the light, the darkness settling around her like familiar terrain, and understood something with absolute clarity. She hadn't ended a war. She had prevented one. And sometimes, that was the only victory that mattered. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Epic Recon Stories. Here we tell the missions that never made the headlines, the decisions made in silence, and the people who carried them. More stories are coming soon.